አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ ጊዜያዊ ጥቅምን አምቢኝ ብለው የዘመመን ሊያቀና እውነትና እውቀትን አስከትሎ ኢኮኖሚያዊና መንፈሳዊ መረጃዎችን እንካችሁ ይላል። ትኩስ ዜናዎች፣ ዘጋቢ ፊልሞች፣ ጥልቅ ትንታኔዎች በአደባባይ ሚዲያ ይቀርባሉ። ራእያችን ጊዜውን ያማከለና ዘመኑን የዋጀ በእውነት የነጠሩ መረጃዎችን በእውቀት ደግፎ ለሀገራችን ብሎም ለዓለም ሕዝብ ማዳረስ ነው። አድሬሳችን አደባባይ ኢንፎ ሚዲያ @gmail.com፣ በዌብሳይታችን www.adebabai.com። ያግኙን፣ ይርዱን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ።
The Golden Monastery in the Golden State. Gateway to Heaven, St. John the Baptist and St. Arsema Monastery in the Northern California, Nevada, and Arizona Diocese will have its first informational conference take place soon. We kindly invite you to mark your calendars for April 10th and 11th of 2021. Special guests such as His Grace Abuna Ermias, His Grace Abuna Abraham, and Magabi Hati Sishatu from Ethiopia will be present. North American archbishops, priests, preachers, and gospel singers will be present as well. The conference will be hosted by Adebabay Media and will be streamed through YouTube and Facebook Live as well as Zoom starting at 4 p.m. Pacific Time or 7 p.m. in Eastern Time. Don't forget to share, like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow our Facebook page. We hope you attend and invite fellow Orthodox Christians to this conference. The Northern California, Nevada, and Arizona Diocese.
Adebabay Media yeni now. Adebabay Media yeni now.
Adebabay Media yeni now.
Adebabay Media የሁላችንም ነው።
የኛ ቤተሰብ አደባባይ ሚዲያን ይመለከታል። የእናንተስ?
Do your parents watch Adebabay Media?
Watch, follow, subscribe and help አደባባይ። አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ።
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is Adebabay Media's Your Digest program. My name is Gessesse, and I'll be your host for today. Today we're going to be talking about conservatism, what it means, what conservative stands for, and what they believe, and other conservative thoughts and diversity of thoughts within the Conservative Party, and even people that may not necessarily identify themselves as Republican, but do have these conservative beliefs. I'd like to invite everyone to share and like this conversation and stay with us.
አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ ጊዜያዊ ጥቅምን አምቢኝ ብለው የዘመመን ሊያቀና እውነትና እውቀትን አስከትሎ ኢኮኖሚያዊና መንፈሳዊ መረጃዎችን እንካችሁ ይላል። ትኩስ ዜናዎች፣ ዘጋቢ ፊልሞች፣ ጥልቅ ትንታኔዎች በአደባባይ ሚዲያ ይቀርባሉ። ራእያችን ጊዜውን ያማከለና ዘመኑን የዋጀ በእውነት የነጠሩ መረጃዎችን በእውቀት ደግፎ ለሀገራችን ብሎም ለዓለም ሕዝብ ማዳረስ ነው። አድሬሳችን አደባባይ ኢንፎ ሚዲያ @gmail.com፣ በዌብሳይታችን www.adebabai.com። ያግኙን፣ ይርዱን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ።
Welcome back everyone. If you're just joining us, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about cultural and political conservatism with my guest Mahider Gessesse. We have a wide variety of topics that we're going to be covering today, from feminism to LGBTQ, race and racism, the KKK and Black Lives Matter, and of course Trump and Biden, and how all of this comes together and where we are as a community, as well as really truly understanding what conservatism is. My guest today is actually a person that first introduced me to, the Republican Party and the conservative thoughts as well. So I'm really thankful and grateful, Mahider, that you have accepted my invitation to have this conversation with us. And thank you for being here, and welcome to Adebabay Media.
It's a pleasure to be here. I really care about this topic. So.
Absolutely. So tell us a bit about yourself first, and then we'll jump into our topic today.
Okay, so I'm a second-year college student now. In high school, I became pretty involved in politics. Like, I started a club at my school to give confidence to conservative students who didn't feel like they could speak up in class for various reasons, mostly fear of ostracism. And so I wanted to give them confidence by showing them there's other people who thought like they did. And I've been pretty absent, I would say, from politics ever since I got into college because I've been pretty busy with school. And my concern for the Ethiopian American community is that because we focus on some few issues, we overlook a lot of policies that the Democratic Party holds that we don't necessarily agree with or benefit from. And raising awareness to that is really important to me. And then my transition, I guess I was also raised, politically, we thought we were Democrats for a very long time. And I realized that I was actually, I aligned better with Republicans pretty young. After, I think, one class, we were talking about the Great Depression and the policies that were taken up after in the Great New Deal, where the government borrowed a lot of money to spur infrastructure jobs, to create jobs. And that didn't really make a lot of sense to me because I didn't understand how, if the government is bankrupt itself, it could take out debt and benefit people. Like, that seemed like, in the long run, that would come back to bite you because you have to pay it back. And the way I understood economics to work, being trade between people that are consenting parties, those didn't really align very well. And so when I told my teacher what I thought about it, he's like, oh, you're probably going to be a Republican. And I was very concerned because I'd always heard that Republicans were racist. And so I took a lot of time to think about, like, wait a second, how could I agree with a party that's so racist? And, then I found people, Milton Friedman, and a lot of the commentators who didn't seem racist to me at all. And then I came across Thomas Sowell's work, and I realized that really there was not, like, the race narrative is pretty fabricated. Like, there's nothing about the Republican Party or the policies that they hold that is racist at all. And in fact, I think that is their policies would be the most beneficial to minorities who are living in poverty today.
Absolutely. I think for me, we're family, so we always celebrated holidays together and such here in Seattle. And I remember one time we were having a conversation about Obama, and you're just like, Obama, like, just destroyed everything. I was like, what are you talking? What are you talking about? And it, like, I was just really shocked. And you said, you're a Republican, and I was just like, no, you're not. Like, you're lying. Because for me, I never really met young Republicans until I met you, really. I didn't even know that was a thing. I thought Republicanism or, conservatism, really, specifically, was for old white men and rich people and racists, right? And people that don't really care about anybody. And, I've read pretty extensively, at least I thought at the time, especially because it was my minor as well, being, ethnic studies and being heavily involved in activism and such when I was on campus. You asked me some questions where I just did not know how to answer, right? I was really confused about it. And, even with the answers that I was giving you, you would ask me questions back, and there were gaps in my beliefs and my stance that I couldn't really back up. So you really did push me to say, okay, let me get over my biases of what conservatism is, and read into it and really understand where I stand as a person, as opposed to just believing what I was told, reading the things that I was told to read and go and vote, or, I guess, give votes to values that I don't necessarily value. So I want to say thank you for that, first and foremost. And I think, like you said, it's really difficult for people to say, I could be a Republican, especially because as immigrants, and also because as Black people, we tend to associate the Republican Party as, the party of hate for people of color and minorities as well, like you said.
Yeah, I'm very glad that changed your mind at all. I mean, I talk to people a lot, and that makes me pretty happy to hear.
I'm glad. So what is your political affiliation? Do you have one?
So I consider myself a conservative first, and that usually ends up being that I vote Republican whenever, the option presents itself, which is not very often in Seattle. But I think I would within the Republican Party, there's many different schools of thought. There's people who are really socially and fiscally conservative. Now a growing majority, I guess, is going to be socially a little bit more conservative, or pretty moderate, actually just appears conservative now. And fiscally not so much conservative, as we saw with Trump, with the spending and tariffs and regulating industries to support Americans who've been left behind, or that sort of thing. And then there's also the libertarian group, which wants government to be as small as possible, whether that means at the expense of protecting conservative values against groups that are trying to actively erode them. And I think that I probably would be a libertarian if we lived in an ideal world. But the fact of the matter remains that there are people who are going to exercise and try to push on you their beliefs and their ways of life. And because you live with people and you don't just live by yourself, you have to have a way of working that out, and that's politics. So you can't really be a libertarian. And that is why I consider myself more now as a conservative, like an actual conservative, whereas a couple of years ago, I probably would have said I was more libertarian. So that's
pretty awesome. I think the same goes with the Democratic Party as well. There's quite a variety of school of thoughts within those parties. Definitely, I think libertarians are those that may not necessarily have the most votes or the most representatives, because I think, like you said, it might be a bit difficult to execute those policies 100% in that sense.
Because you're essentially running with, I'm really not going to do that much. Like, I'm just going to draw back. But people elect, politicians who say, I will give you this, I will do this, and I'll do that. So they don't.
I think Ron Paul, I believe, was a libertarian candidate, right, for the Republican Party, if I'm not mistaken.
He was the very libertarian of the 13 that were there.
Yeah, I remember some of the things that he was saying. Like you said, it just feels like, well, cool, that sounds cool. So what is your job going to be? Where for him, it's like, we're going to cut these things. We're especially with the feds and his opinion about how the Fed should be run and such. It was quite amazing. Like, oh yeah, that sounds good, but I don't see a way out of where we are. But I guess that's why we're here to talk about, right? Mm-hmm. So what are some of the things that you believe and you stand for when you decide which side of the alley you might be belonging in?
So what really pushed me to the conservative side, like I said, was the economic policies. Because that's all I was really concerned with. I was pretty young, so I hadn't really hit upon the social, clashes I would have being raised Orthodox yet. And so that was what really pushed me to the conservative side, because they do believe in free market capitalism, or as free as, is reasonable. I think now you're seeing more and more a willingness to rein in on corporations because of policies regarding big tech, for example, and censorship. And even when it comes to protections for, different industries, because you can't, I'm more sympathetic now than I was before to regulating industries, just because you can't really run a country where you have companies like Amazon competing against, other industries that are going to go out of business, and all the people who used to be in the industries of before. It's really hard to transition into the new demands that are coming up really quickly. And so, as we make policy to deal with these kinds of social falling outs and issues. And so I think you can see that happening in the Republican Party. But in general, they tend to be way, way more focused on free markets and people being able to choose how they spend their money, what they do with the money they bring in. And they don't tax that much. We do as conservatives believe in states being able to decide what they do and having a limited federal government, and that the Constitution was written primarily to protect rights that came from the Creator, and were given, and everybody has them. So, we believe in what the Declaration of Independence says, essentially, and that is the cornerstone of our defense of the Constitution, because the government is in place just to protect these inalienable rights that are already given to you. And as such, most of the Constitution and its separation of powers is focused on making sure that the government doesn't overreach and, overreach into the lives of individual people and stop them from making the choices that they need to make. Because free people, we believe, are capable of making choices for themselves, and in separate states should be able to manage themselves, and they would do it better than a centralized federal government. And so the Republican ideal, as opposed to a big central government, is important to conservatives. And justice and administration of justice and national defense are also very important. And so that means, if something is done wrong, we believe in due process, and we believe that whoever was the guilty party needs, punishment. And there doesn't need to be this gray area where some people are treated differently under the law because of whatever exemptions people want to give them. This includes people who are, really wealthy and powerful. Like that sentiment is really what Donald Trump hit on, that previous Republicans hadn't. For the couple of years that the Democrats were really gaining ground, it was because the Republicans were not speaking to the actual problems that people were concerned about. They were really focused on just taxes and dealing with the debt, which they didn't even do properly. So, I do have enough criticism of the Republican Party, but as conservatives in general, the ideal is small government that just protects people's rights and does not infringe on the rights that have been outlined in the Constitution, leaves the states to make their own decisions, and protects the individual's rights as given by God, which is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Absolutely. I think something that really attracts me to, the Republican platform and conservatism is that the government needs to back off out of my day-to-day life. And I think that is well more articulated and well done within the Republican Party as opposed to the Democratic Party. I think we'll talk about that as well in a little bit, but that freedom that the Constitution has granted every citizen living within this country is it feels like it's always negotiable whenever there's a new policy comes in, whenever there's a new, activism is being done and such. And we're always trying to negotiate that individual liberty for the satisfaction of whatever is, hip and culturally appropriate at the time. So since we started in that route, let's talk a little bit about, feminism and LGBTQ. I think for me, something that I've openly discussed here on Adebabay, that, I am a Republican and I voted for Trump. I have no shame about it. And quite a lot of people ask me, how could you vote for a Republican, for Trump specifically, being a woman, right? And I think that sentiment is not only really specifically for Trump himself, but I think there's that sense of like Republicans tend to be sexist, or they don't support feminist laws as much as the Democratic Party would do. So what is your answer for that, as far as that goes? And how do you see those policies put forth within the different parties? Okay,
so I think what we have to ask when we're dealing with this issue is, like, what do we mean by feminist policies or, feminist politics? Because one of the really big complaints that is apparently a very concerning issue for many women, and if you don't support this, you're anti-women, is abortion, which I don't accept that is the standard for what a person who believes that women should have equal rights as men has to believe. This is, to me, a human rights issue. And so, and as a religious person, obviously I'm against abortion, but the point remains that I don't think it's an indicator of how much you care about women that you support abortion. So that's one of the main things they point to say that the Republican Party is not for women, because that's what they consider to be for women. And then the wage gap and other things like that, I think Republicans tend to, because of the focus on, choices in the market, like the market operates on choices, and there is no written legal reasons why women cannot get paid the same as men or get hired. So if there's any kind of biases that exist inside of people, you're not going to legislate that out. And so that's either going to take time or better parenting on the part of every American. And because of this, there's not that much talk and emphasis about women need to do this, women are underrepresented in that. I mean, people make different choices. We do have a culture where maybe women feel like some things are more suitable to them than other things. Unless you want to eliminate whatever cultural standards we have right now, just because you need to see 50-50 everywhere, I don't think that the Republican Party has any shortcomings in dealing with problems that concern women as compared to what the Democrats are doing. There's issues that I think do face women that both parties have failed on, and that is, women's, like the way that our system is structured. If you're going to have a family, you're going to suffer for it in terms of your paycheck at some point if you're a woman, right? So these issues can be dealt with on a policy basis, but there's not one party that's better and at doing that than the other. They both do care about this issue. I mean, we're seeing more talk about it on the Republican side now than we have been previously, but that's also because more Republicans are coming around to the idea that we have to be willing to exercise the actual power of the government. I do believe that should be either left to the states personally or the companies that handle that. I don't know what federal policy would solve this problem, because unless we totally upturn, the way that the university system works and how paychecks are decided, you're not going to be able to eliminate the fact that women aren't as favored after they have children or because of the time they take off to have children. And I mean, social conservatives also, we believe that you staying home to take care of your kids, even if that comes with a downgrade in paycheck, that is a very important thing to do. And that's not a reflection of how you were mistreated or, you failed to live up to the standard of, a woman who's strong and, brings home the paycheck, because this is a very valuable contribution to society. And I think now that Republicans are coming around to, okay, we need to actually say that that's what we believe. You're seeing more talk about how do we support families and how do we support women who are going to have children, but probably still need to work, because to be competitive in a big city, for example, you probably need both parents working. So I think on the Democrat side, and because of the media, there's just a lot more coverage saying that Republicans are not for women, and they don't. I mean, if you look at how many women representatives the Republicans got in the last in the last election, representatives, and I think that there's not a real big problem of either party not being pro-women. And I also think that the way that the Democrats are doing it doesn't really make sense because of the reasons I outlined before. I don't think you can fix the issues that we're seeing by legislating it out.
Yeah, I think sometimes, especially speaking back to what you mentioned earlier about abortion, I'm all for women having their choices when it comes to that. I haven't met yet a Republican that says, that right should be taken away from the woman. But I think there's also another argument to that side where, especially when we're talking about, the Black community that we are part of, the majority of these babies that are being aborted happen to be Black. And I read this thing one time where since the 60s, about 20 million Black children have been aborted. That's quite a large chunk of, the population that we're talking about, where the African-American community has stayed stagnant as far as population growth since then. Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about the potential that we're losing in that sense, I don't necessarily think abortion is the right answer for what the Black community within America is facing, which seems to be a lot more accessible to that community as opposed to other things, right? So for me, that's one thing that where I'm just like, okay, woman has every right to her body, but at the same time, is that really the choice that we're given? And I think for me, with the Democratic Party, how much time and energy they're spending in trying to protect this right that's not threatened right now, as opposed to actually giving other options to women, right? That's for me, that's where the fight should be at. But I don't see that fight right now. And just saying that, like, women should abort her child is almost like I'm with you, like I'm standing next to you, and that's a cool thing for you to do. It's disturbing to me. I don't know how to reconcile the two, but that's where I'm at. But speaking to abortion, I know that, within America, you can't use public funded, so tax money, to fund these abortion clinics. But Democrats have found a way around it in foreign policy. Could you tell us a bit about that, if you're aware of it?
So the Hyde Amendment is what prevents federal funds from going to clinics and places that have abortions and funding abortion, except with the exception of 3 cases where they can fund abortion, which is rape, incest, and a threat to the mother's life. So this is the law of the land. And then there was this law that was passed. I think it was like a gag rule to Mexico City policy, and that makes it so that there's no federal aid also. Like you can't give federal aid to organizations that abroad are promoting or supporting abortion and talking about abortion. And what has happened is that in an executive order, President Biden has basically taken away that restriction on American funds going to organizations that talk about and carry out abortions abroad.
Yeah, and I just find it quite amusing how, that especially because, it was a whole religion thing for me. I feel like, that personal liberty, and especially, it's part of my first amendments, right? Not amendments, a Bill of Rights, to say, my religion should be protected and respected. And I feel like for most Christians that may not necessarily want to be part of this kind of, process or law or regulations. That's one of the reasons why this law even exists within the United States, to say, you can't use taxpayers' money, except, of course, for the reasons that you said so. And the complete disregard of, because a lot of the foreign policy is run out of the executive branch, and the president pretty much has, almost 100% right to however he wants to allocate the funds that he has under him, right? And for him to find a workaround it and, say so, it's, for me, it's just like, this is how you're showing me that you don't necessarily respect religious folk that are living within your own country. And the way it was done, even without fully giving it credit or even being advertised as such, it was just kind of like, I don't know, quite disturbing to me, because it just felt like we're just going to sweep that under the rug and hope that nobody notices. And it's just a transparency that we've been promised, because from the terrible Trump era. I don't see it. And for me, that's when I was just like, okay, then I'm going to read every executive order that you're signing, because as much as we were shocked by the number of, Trump executive orders, and I like to say here that when Trump first won, I was like devastated. And now Biden is signing like four times as much, I think, at this rate. And it's really difficult to keep track of what he's signing and what kind of laws are being, enforced within the country. And another thing that is also happening is, especially when it comes to, again, feminism, and mixing the LGBTQ rights into what I'm seeing it as like an encroachment to the feminist right, like the women rights within America, and especially the executive order that he signed, I think, on the first day, that allows trans women to compete in women's sports. And the lack of outrage in that from the feminist groups is confusing to me. So could you tell us a bit about that order as well and how it's being perceived in our pop culture?
So essentially, the big thing that's happened in the, in pretty recent past is they have expanded the protections under Title IX to include now gender identity as well. So you can't discriminate on the basis of gender identity. So if person who's born male has gender dysphoria, is undergoing hormone treatment or whatever the case may be, and is now identifying as a trans woman or female, that person can't be discriminated against from competing in women's sports because they're female. Like, that's their gender identity now. And this kind of blurring, like you said, and the same as with the abortion issue, is Biden was pretty moderate on all of these when he was running, pretty much, and most of his career. He was very adamantly, the Hyde Amendment that I talked about that prevents the federal government from funding abortions, he said he was in full support of the Hyde Amendment until he decided to run for president, where he changed his mind and said, actually, because of the healthcare policy that I'm going to propose that most people are going to be covered under, because that's going to be federal, and I want women to be able to get their abortion under that care, I no longer can support the Hyde Amendment. And so, and same with this expansion, people were not awake to it. What it means, most people were not awake to what's going on. What are they planning to do? And then on top of that, like with the lack of reaction from feminist groups, within feminist groups, there's two kinds of people. They've alienated most people who are reasonable feminists. So the only people left who are still very adamantly feminist are full on board with whatever this is, right? So this is, of course, trans women are women. Like, whether it actually is consistent with their own definitions, which a couple of years ago was gender is separate from sex. And so, you can express your gender in whatever way you want. You can still be born male. And so if you ask a person who thinks that, they'll say, well, I don't know that, like transgender females should be competing in female sports. But then now, like, that has shifted. So the gender identity confers the distinction isn't made because of your identity. You're playing the same sport. It's made because of whatever your biological, makeup is. So I don't know what kind of standards or how exactly you fix this problem. I personally don't understand how it is such a big issue. And what I mean by this is the number of transgender youth and competing in sports, while it's exploded in the past few years, I still don't think is big enough that it actually warrants like a federal policy on it. I don't know, but it somehow is. And there's some states that are taking action against it, but
and it makes it difficult. I think it makes
really
it difficult.
And you can't, like, the only resolution really on a federal scale for this is you can't undo it with an executive order. It can be overturned at any point, right? But they don't trust that they can't get it through Congress, right? And they can't. They really can't. Exactly. That's why it's all executive order. And on top of that, it has to go to the courts, and the courts have to be willing to hear a case about it and decide one way or the other. And I believe they might have made a decision that did recognize that sexual identity is like an immutable kind of characteristic of protected class. And so that's going to take time to undo, but each state is taking their own action. So
and I think for me it's not, and it makes it difficult. I say it makes it difficult to have this conversation is because it seems like, you're like, they're quick to label you that you don't care about LGBTQ rights, right? And I think what we're forgetting within this is how much of women's rights that we're taking away, because there is a reason why there's women's sports and there's men's sports, because we know for a fact that women cannot compete with men, right? And hope to win. There's a reason why there are scholarships that are specifically for women, especially in sports, that, because there's no, like, you can't compete with biologically born men. And I think that's a difference for me. Like you said, a few years ago, the difference was, sexual identity and sex were different. So like gender was, a social construct or whatever. And sex is biology. You can't change biology. Right now, though, we're saying we could change biology.
Yes.
And it just for me, it's like I was trying to read more into it. We know that men lungs are larger than women, and that's not going to change because now you're taking hormones.
Their argument here stands that their argument is that it's really not as big a deal as you guys are making it out to be, because there's not that many transgender females trying to compete, one, and two, the ones who are competing, it would be so unfair to make them compete against the boys.
Yeah.
So it's really picking the group that, it's at the expense of one or the other, it's looking like. One thing I saw was in California, I don't know, I think like 3 days ago or something, there was an article about California prisons acting on requests to transfer over 200 inmates who identified as female into women's prisons. So to think that this will have no consequences apart from, some women losing some sports scholarships, you're seeing it happen. Like, you haven't seen it on the federal scale yet, but here's a perfect example. There's women's shelters who it's hard to enforce and say, the transgender females who are not at all threatening to women, you can, like, I don't know how you can come up with a standard that allows you to get away with, saying the sex difference doesn't matter.
But they're not saying that. I think that's why, for me, that's what's surprising to me. They're not saying that. Mostly from what I've been able to read, even, some doctors that have done this research, they say we don't really know what would be fair for women to compete with, right? They could, try all the hormone differences that they want to check, and they could do all these things that they could check, but the push to merge, and say there's no difference between trans women and cis women is what, women that are born naturally women are called, is quite, like, it's confusing to me, because that was never the case. Even when we were going to school and studying a lot of LGBTQ resources and, writings and such, even their own activism, that was never a thing. There's a reason why they're called trans women, right? And women that are born naturally, you can't even say that now anymore, because that's, you're just being a bigot, apparently. But there's a difference between me biologically and what I'm capable of doing, especially in sports, versus someone that was born a male and transitions, right? And we've seen, like you said, it's not that many women that are competing, right? But I don't think, for me, that's not the issue necessarily. The issue is that they feel like that should be an issue, and this law was passed. So you can't have it both ways, where when people are outraged and say that, you can't say, why are you mad about this? Like, not enough women are competing, not enough trans women are competing anyway. But at the same time, if that wasn't the case, then why was the executive order necessary?
Because you can never actually argue about what is happening. Because the minute you say, hey, this is going to be a problem, they say, no, like, why are you so upset? Like, it's really just, it's like 5 people, like, it's just some people. Why do you hate them so much? And then at the same time, the laws, like, federal laws don't just stick like that. Like, they're making it a problem, because they're, like, I'm sure in previous years, if there was somebody who could have gotten a, who's going through this gender reassignment process, they would have gotten accommodations. Like, they probably could have, like, you could have gotten your kid to playing whatever sports. But now that you're pushing a legal process to it, you can't go ahead and claim again that, I don't know why you're so upset. Like, this is really just 3 people that we're talking about. No, like, you're making it a federal issue. And so we have to talk about all of the consequences. That's one thing that bothers me about a bunch of the Democratic policies, is that they sound nice, but you really have to think about what are going to be the consequences. You can't just do things because the optics are nice. Like, you have to consider all of the possible consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where I'm stuck. And also the same people that are advocating for this. And I've tried to talk to quite a lot of like people that consider themselves feminist, men that consider themselves feminist. They're kind of stuck on this issue. Like, oh, well, that doesn't sound fair, but that's interesting, right? That's like literally all they say. There's no outrage about it. It's just like they don't know how to navigate that world of really saying, this is stupid. Like, we need to step here and like really look at what we're trying to do. And no one is willing. I haven't seen a lot of people willing to say that outside of, you know, the Republican commentators that talk about this, right? But also another thing that came out of, especially focusing on LGBTQ, is the executive order Biden has signed about allowing transgender people to participate in the military. And like you said, it sounds nice. Like, why are they, you know, they're Americans, they should be allowed to run, you know, to serve their country, right? They want to serve their country. That should absolutely be acceptable. But have you seen any issue as far as what exactly is that executive order doing? Is it as nice as it sounds?
I mean, so the consequences would be that there's people who would join. I mean, the way that the executive order stands, they specifically say in it that during the Obama administration too, they had determined that it was totally reasonable for somebody to join the military and while serving, undergo the transition. And so you have to ask, like, what is this exactly? If you're serving your country, you're serving your country and that's it. Like, there's a lot of premises that we're accepting in having these laws be enacted, which, like, the biggest thing that they did is said that transgender healthcare is healthcare, and so people can join the military to get that, treatment, and that is justified by saying we are stronger because we're more diverse in our military. So I think a big thing that I don't know if you watched Tucker Carlson, but he got into a really big debacle with the military because he came after them for, designing uniforms that fit women better, especially pregnant women. And I don't think there's a problem with them designing things that fit better for women. That's totally fine. But the point he was making was, why is it that we have pregnant women serving in the military? Like, it's not really, the military is a military. It's not supposed to be, everyone is represented. Like, there's qualifications. I can't be in the military because I'm too short, right? Like, that's in me. I can't help it. But, like, that's what it is. Like, there's standards for a reason. And so if the thing is, you have to meet the standards to be in the military, which is, the executive order says, you have to meet the standards to be in the military. And if your identity happens to be whatever, it doesn't matter if you meet the standards. However, once you get in, you can, while serving, undergo the transition. I don't exactly understand how that adds a benefit. They say the cost is less than 1% of what the military would spend on healthcare, but that amounts to $8 million. So to me, it's more of an issue with, like, what exactly do we think the military is, and what are we doing, and why are we doing it? Not so much that, I have a specific problem with transgender people serving in the military.
Yeah, and I think also this speaks for me back to why liberal policies are just kind of like out of nowhere for me for some parts, because why are we, is it really that necessary that we're talking about this? And if we're talking about this, though, let's make sure that we're talking about it honestly. And from the coverage that I've seen about this executive order, it just seemed like, Trump was just a horrible president that prevented LGBTQ trans people specifically from participating in the military. And Biden, President Biden went in and, like the hero he is, he fixed it. Yeah. And for me, I was like, well, there has to be more to this than just somebody prevented it and somebody else allowed it. And the more I read about it and realized, okay, so people could join and do their transitional surgery with the military budget. And for me, if they didn't think this would be an issue for the majority of their viewers, they would discuss it. But that was never discussed. That was never, from all that I've seen, I don't know if you've seen any differently, especially with the liberal media, that was never part of the conversation. The one-to-one points of what this executive order is doing wasn't discussed. And I think it's just speaks volumes to, we're going to make a law. We're going to know that, most of the media is going to be on our side and pick and choose what they're going to cover and not be critical about the policies that we put forth. And people that consume it are just going to trust, whatever they're told at face value and go with it. And they get to keep their, their value of like, oh, the Democratic Party is open and diverse in every way possible and open to everything, and anything you throw at them, without necessarily truly speaking to the majority of their population in an honest way that says, this is what the executive order is, this is what it's doing, this is what it's overturning. And I think there's a difference in that transparency for me, as opposed to the law itself. Or the executive.
Yeah. A lot of the issues that I tend to look at the wall construction. That's like a very plain, simple instance of where there was a reasonable solution that all of them, like there's actual videos of Chuck Schumer, Bernie Sanders, and Hillary Clinton all saying, I would 100% be down for a wall at the southern border, because it will be effective. Like there's video of them saying now, and then during the Trump administration, he was xenophobic, racist, everything, because he wanted to build a wall on the southern border, and walls are ineffective. Yeah. And that was like fact. And then the crisis happened. And now the Biden administration is saying, we're going to consider maybe filling in the gaps that that were left by the Trump administration. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of reality that's obfuscated by the way that the media chooses to cover things.
Yeah, and absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's also something that for me, when we're outraged, because I think the Democratic Party has gotten really good at using our emotions. They know how to push the button. And I remember during Obama's time, there were so many protests against, his immigration laws and how many people he's deported. And the effect of that in one turn is that he created a lot of unskilled works open, which tends to be filled by, the African-American community. And then he turned around and said, see, I fixed the issue of unemployment within the African-American community. But, his whole, like how he handled immigration was just never really covered as much within the media. So people didn't really quite knew what was going on. But it's just an idea. I was like, oh yeah, Obama deported a lot of people, more than any president, even more than Trump. Yeah. But people are quick to say, we will never forgive how Trump deported all these people and, the cage that he put people in and all that stuff. But now come to realize media is not allowed within those facilities anymore. Who knows how they're keeping them, right? Yeah. Especially with COVID now. And then just why are we not outraged at the fact that this is America? We live in America, the freest world that's supposed to be. But the Biden administration is effectively denying media access to how they're treating immigrants that are currently migrating into the country and how they're being kept.
Right. And one of the things that's always bothered me, and I was pretty interested in international politics as well, is there's an island near Australia where, and this was during the time that I think the Syrian refugee crisis was really, really bad. And the US said, we're not taking any. So there weren't many people trying, to come in illegal or whatever ways. Yeah. Australia and Europe, the EU, would not say that outright. So people would risk their lives to get there. They would put them on the island and say, wait, while we try to sort out your paper problems. Mm-hmm. What went on the island is absolutely inhumane, right? No, where's the coverage for that? I mean, the desperation on that island, you can't just say some things. People will take action based on what you say, and you have to be responsible for what you caused, especially if you actually straight up caused it. I think the humanitarian crisis for people trying to come into the U.S. illegally with smugglers is huge. Yeah. Not talking about that at all and saying, look at us like detaining people. What are you going to open your doors and let everybody in? Because trust me, there's going to be a whole lot more people trying to come in, as we saw when it changed from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. I think the rhetoric, as much as they like to say rhetoric matters, they really don't care about their own rhetoric. But it matters. So
because they're not held like accountable. I think with a lot of the Democratic policies that I see, they're not really held accountable to their actions and their decisions, and what the consequences of those actions and decisions are. And I think we could talk for hours about the different policies that they put in place, and we're still having to pay for them because they're not willing to admit that this policy probably doesn't work. We're losing millions and millions. We're losing a lot of resources out of it, but no one is holding them accountable for it. So just kind of like expected, it's always going to be around. These policies are always going to be around. And the way we're going to solve it is by throwing more money at it, not necessarily admitting the fact that government, should experiment. We experimented on these things. They didn't work out, so we're going to try something else. And that kind of being held accountable, I don't necessarily see. And I think to kind of merge into this, I know a lot of our viewers are asking about racism within the Republican Party. And I think this is something that, especially with our, the Ethiopian American community, what scares us the most about the Republican Party is the fact that it's assumed to be very racist, as we started this conversation. So let's discuss a bit about the different policies that may have, we see that historically at least have affected the Black community, the African American community, which we are part of, and see how those things have trickled down. So maybe we could start from the Jim Crow era and what that means and where that comes from, and maybe we could build it up to the Trump era. Does that sound good?
Sure. That sounds good.
Okay. So what are policies that you think were very racist in America that people have fought for and had been removed so far?
So I think, clearly the most racist ones is that Black people were not considered full people, and so they could be owned, which is a pretty racist thing. And then the civil rights, like the voting laws, the voting restriction laws, and Jim Crow segregation laws, which they weren't exactly federal, but they existed in the states that they existed in, and which was like the separate but equal, which wasn't really equal because there wasn't many resources. The Miscarriage of Justice, where there, I don't know if you know about Black Wall Street, Tulsa. Basically,
okay, I've seen some.
And so Black people could be doing well, they could be really mistreated, and justice wouldn't be carried out because whatever group was in charge. So I think that's where the hostility towards the police comes or stems from, at least in some part. And so the same way like the KKK would do things, there wouldn't be adequate responses. And additionally to that, I think redlining was a problem that Black people have faced in this country. Basically discrimination from business, from engaging in business with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to invite everyone to please go ahead and share and like this conversation. And also, if you have any questions, really, we're kind of looking through some of the comment sections and we try to answer them as much as possible. So go ahead and drop us your comments and questions as well. And we'll be right back after a very quick break.
The Golden Monastery in the Golden State. Gateway to Heaven, St. John the Baptist, and St. Arsema Monastery in the Northern California, Nevada, and Arizona Diocese will have its first informational conference take place soon. We kindly invite you to mark your calendars for April 10th and 11th of 2021. Special guests such as His Grace Abuna Ermias, His Grace Abuna Abraham, and Megabi Hati Sushatu from Ethiopia will be present. North American archbishops, priests, preachers, and gospel singers will be present as well. The conference will be hosted by Adebabay Media and will be streamed through YouTube and Facebook Live as well as Zoom starting at 4 p.m. Pacific Time or 7 p.m. in Eastern Time. Don't forget to share, like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow our Facebook page. We hope you attend and invite fellow Orthodox Christians to this conference. The Northern California, Nevada, and Arizona Diocese.
አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ ጊዜያዊ ጥቅምን አምቢኝ ብለው የዘመመን ሊያቀና እውነትና እውቀትን አስከትሎ ኢኮኖሚያዊና መንፈሳዊ መረጃዎችን እንካችሁ ይላል። ትኩስ ዜናዎች፣ ዘጋቢ ፊልሞች፣ ጥልቅ ትንታኔዎች በአደባባይ ሚዲያ ይቀርባሉ። ራዕያችን ጊዜውን ያማከለና ዘመኑን የዋጀ በእውነት የነጠሩ መረጃዎችን በእውቀት ደግፎ ለሀገራችን ብሎም ለዓለም ሕዝብ ማዳረስ ነው። አድሬሳችን አደባባይ ኢንፎ ሚዲያ @gmail.com፣ በዌብሳይታችን www.adebabai.com። ያግኙን፣ ይርዱን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ።
Welcome back, everyone. Today we're having a conversation about culture and political conservatism, and my guest is Mahider Gessesse. And thank you for everyone that has joined us. And we're just talking about, racist policies in America in the last, 200 years or so. And just to pick up on that, I think something that I noticed, Mahider, I don't know if you've seen this, I was trying to read up, the different platforms of the parties, and looking at like the Democratic websites and the history of the Democratic Party. It doesn't start, like they don't start recording or sharing that history until the 1920s, where the women's voting right comes around. And for me, that took me aback. Like, what are you all hiding? Like, I know you've been around for a long time, because they've been around since 19th century. So what happened to the first 100 years of your history that you don't want to discuss? And I think speaking to that, we could focus a bit more about the different racist policies and really which party do they come from?
So, I mean, the Dixiecrats, as they used to be called, was the party of the Jim Crow laws, which was the backlash to the Republican efforts at like the integration after the emancipation.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of efforts going on right after emancipation, and the emancipation, the party of Lincoln, that is the Republican Party. It was founded as the abolitionist party during that time. And so what happened, so basically the Democratic South, which was mostly the slave-owning population, or the population that was adamantly fighting to keep slaves after Reconstruction, as a backlash, instituted the Jim Crow laws, which were passed by the states, which prohibited people, even if you as a cafe owner wanted to serve Black people, you couldn't. It was state law that you couldn't. And so those laws happened. They were all Democrat. And then the voting and the intimidation of voters and those strenuous tests to qualify to vote were instituted by Democrats to prevent Black people in the South from electing Republicans, because Black people were predominantly Republican. Mm-hmm. And then I think the civil rights law that most people credit to Lyndon Johnson and the Democrats actually passed the state, the Senate and the House of Representatives with like around 80% of the Republicans supported it, 60% of the Democrats supported it. Lyndon Johnson just happened to be the president at the time, and so he signed it. And when he signed it, he said, I am afraid that we've lost the Democratic South for, the coming few years. And so basically, it was kind of an accident that they got credit for the civil rights laws that were passed, the Voting Rights Act.
Absolutely. I think for me, it's always kind of really good to understand that, because to know that a lot of African Americans used to be Republicans until the 60s. That's a fact that no one could deny, because the Republican Party was a party of the people at the time, right? And the Republican Party was the one that was helping them out. And when we're talking about, the KKK and the horror the KKK has unleashed on the African American community, the Democratic Party ran the KKK. That was part of their intimidation to prevent people from voting for a Republican, or if they voted for a Republican, they were killed if they were found out that to have voted for a Republican. And even to speak to that, I know that President Biden's mentor, one of his mentors, was an openly, part of the KKK party, and that was Biden's mentor in the Senate. So this wasn't something that the Democratic Party had ever tried to hide from or lie about, except now that you can't say those things, right? You can't say that the KKK is the Democratic Party's solution to Black people voting Republican. You can't say that the Jim Crow laws are a solution to Black people voting for Republican. It was to a point even they would make Black people pay to vote. They, like you said, even for the civil rights law, that majority of Republicans voted for it. Not only that, actually, the Democratic Party had filibustered it, the law for. Yeah, for exactly. And it took, again, another round of negotiation. And there was this famous saying that, Lyndon Johnson telling Martin Luther King that I need your help. I need you to, to get me some help. And that was part of what Martin Luther King was doing when they were taking that long walk that everybody remembers. That was to change, the public vision of what the civil rights law was supposed to do. And this is all done by the Democratic Party. But now it seems like, at least when we're taught and such, it's like, that's not the Republican. That's right. That's the Republicans' party fault, because somehow magically the parties have flipped.
Mm-mm. Yeah, so no, I looked at what exactly made it so that the South, which used to be a Democratic stronghold, turned pretty red now consistently. Mm-hmm. So up until Georgia this past election. So what had happened is, after Lyndon Johnson won by a landslide, there was 7 Republicans, I think, in the Senate or the House, one of the two, who had voted against passing the Civil Rights Act. And one of, I forget, hold on, I have it here. So this person, I can't find it right now, but he was a Republican who sided with the Democrats and voted against the Civil Rights Act. And he had one of his Democrat friends also, the Democrat friend then switched his party alliance, said he was a Republican, and they ran together against Lyndon Johnson the time he won in a landslide. Mm-hmm. And so even though Lyndon Johnson won, because the Democrat who had now become a Republican to be a running mate to this previous Republican, sorry, I can't remember his name, they got a lot of the Deep South states because that was his home state and the states that were very similar to his home state. And he was a Democrat who had now said he was a Republican. And so that is the first time we see that the South turns red. It was immediately after the signing of the Civil Rights Act. And then the times after that, it was mostly over gun rights and religious freedom. And then it was Reagan who really solidified the South as a red Republican stronghold. So I think Jimmy Carter also had won Southern states. So the previous, the one time right after during Lyndon Johnson's landslide victory, that the South had voted Republican, was kind of an anomaly, and it predicted the fact that in the following years, the South would become Republican on the grounds of issues like guns and I think economics too.
Yeah, and I think that also speaks to, because I try to look up when did the South turn Republican, and it's almost like in the 90s, to be honest, late 80s, where we start seeing that consistent voting for the Republican Party. And for me, that's when I'm like, okay, if the party switched, when did they really switch? Meaning that when do we assign all these racist laws that were passed in America, moving it from the Democratic Party's, plate to the Republican plate? And I think that's something that they can never defend. And I really do believe that's one of the reasons when you go to the Democratic Party to read their platform, their history doesn't start until the 1920s, right? Yeah. And it's just
I remember the person's name is Barry Goldwater. That's the person I was trying to say. He was the one who, initiated this move. Yeah.
So then, when we are saying this, are we saying racism doesn't exist in America anymore? Because I think sometimes when we're talking about racism and who's been, the architect of it within the American society, especially policy-wise. It almost feel like, for people at least, are we denying that racism doesn't exist in America, or is it no longer a problem?
No. So, okay, I also want to preface what we said before. Even though the different parties have a history that, doesn't speak very well for the Democratic Party, I don't believe that you can say, well, this is the history of the party and it can't change at all. I don't think that's true. So it's good to point out, just because they like to, they teach kids as if it's the case that the Republicans were for segregation, slave, and everything evil ever. So it's important to point out that's not the case, just for that reason, not to say that the Democratic Party, because of their history, is still, racist against Black people. So I do prefer to discuss what's going on with Black people today as like what actually is happening today. And to talk about what's happening today, I'm not saying that, I've never heard of a conservative actually. There is a branch of conservatives, or I guess not conservatives, but they are right-wing voters who, do not acknowledge that racism exists, or like if it does, it's fine with them that it exists. Like they tend to vote Republican, but the actual party and all of the prominent commentators, like the mainstream party itself, there's no one that I've ever seen who claims that racism does not exist, period. No, I think the claims have been that it probably exists. There are people we know who do believe in white nationalism. The same way there are people who believe in, a type of Black nationalism now too. And so they exist. There's really, I don't know what you can do about those people except, with exposure, hopefully they will learn what's wrong with that. And so a lot of the racism that we're talking about, even if it exists, I don't think is the biggest problem for African Americans today. I think that whenever we talk about African Americans, we do tend to look at them, or Black people in general, as like victims that are in perpetual need of help. I think there's a lot of people who are taking control of their lives and improving their lives and moving into the middle class. Like I think that happens all of the time. I do think that there is this cycle of poverty that we haven't been able to fix in some areas that are better addressed as a socioeconomic problem than as a race problem, because no one can point to a law and say, that's the racist law. If we got rid of it, this would be better. Yeah. Right. So what they've actually gone to do is change what racism means so that they can call it like all of the things racism. So you can still say, hey, there's racism in America still, and here's how you see it.
Yeah. And I think what's very disingenuous for me, at least with a lot of the Black leaders that we have, is how they are super hyper focused on racism, as opposed to things that are actually going to help, Black folks in America. Like I would rather Michelle Obama, right? She's such a powerful woman. She's accomplished so much on her own, forget the fact that she's, the first lady and all that. Even before that, right? She was one of the most successful Black women in America. She still is. But she chose to talk a lot about racism. Even reading her book, it was kind of sad where she gave that so much attention when, and I saw that difference where like she was talking about her hair growing up and, how people were able to support and grow and change, and how dedicated her dad was to make sure that their family was taken care of and such, to get her to this level that he has gotten her. And I feel like that would have been such a powerful message to focus on and to stay on, and really encourage, communities to really grow into that supportive system that they used to have, as opposed to focus all her energy and time now, for the most part, talking about racism in America. The same was Obama, the same was, Oprah, and all these really successful Black people that we're seeing. And instead of, telling us how they made it there, they're telling us how we will never make it there because we are so disadvantaged. And it's, you're going to have to work 20 times as hard. No one is going to give you opportunities. There's just no luck for you, woe me kind of mindset, while they're millionaires. And for me, it's just like, it's really confusing. Like race hassling is a thing now.
Oh, I definitely believe it's a thing. And even more because I think one of the, the problems that I have is all of the Black people we see as, educated, they should be inspiring us, are all talking about how there's so much stacked against you, and it's such a dangerous thing to live as a Black person in the United States. There are people that they just discarded, not because they weren't impressive Black scholars or anything, just because they weren't saying that.
Yep.
So you have to ask yourself, like, how many Black people really know the story of Thomas Sowell, Walter E. Williams, like these Shelby Steele, these economists who were brilliant people, and they have, written so many books that are great. I mean, there's scholars right now who are African American who are doing so much great work that, if they highlighted them, that would be an inspiration to everybody, that Black people can succeed in things that aren't just politics or pop culture or sports. But for some reason, all of the people that we do highlight are saying the same thing, and none of them are saying, you can do it, here's hard work. Like, people they've lost interest in hearing about like actual and true ways of doing things. Like, it's not as interesting to say, my parents worked really hard and they were dedicated, and now I got here, and I think everybody should try and do the same. Like, for some reason, that's not an interesting storyline anymore. And if you say that, not only aren't people saying that, but people just aren't interested. Like, they don't think that's a good enough explanation anymore. It has to be, there's an entire systemic thing that you can't really see that's there that is affecting you in some way, like, I don't think that's necessarily a good thing at all, but
I think it keeps you in that mindset of like, there's nothing I could do. And for me, I'd rather much know that, yes, of course, there's racism in America, right? I'd rather know how to navigate that a lot more better than someone telling me over and over again, America's a racist country and there's nothing you can do about it. And we're not crazy when we're saying this, because a lot of, these folks that are now activists or anchors or whatever of like Dan Lennon, for example, on CNN, he used to say these things.
Yeah.
This was his stance, right? He used to say, like, Black people need to get up and try their hardest and get a job. Like, we need to make sure that there's not, drugs in our community. We're selling to each other. We need to make sure that we're not killing each other, because majority of the Black homicides are happening by Black people, not police. And he used to say this. He no longer says this. Yeah. He's a millionaire now because he's found out that there's no money in telling the truth. There's a lot of money to be made in talking about how America is a racist country, and there's absolutely nothing Black people could do about their situation.
What impresses me more is that they say this, and then if you say the other thing, which they were saying just a few minutes ago, you're like, that is such an uneducated opinion. Like, can you believe that? Can you believe that someone would say something like that? And there's nothing uneducated about something being true and having been true. Like, just because it's old, it doesn't mean it's not true anymore. Like, some things, that's just the way they are. And I think, I do think that's a very important point to stress. Just because your parents told you about it, and just because, it's been here for a very long time, it doesn't mean it's a tired message that's not going to be useful anymore today.
And I think the main leader for this is Black Lives Matter.
Right.
For me, I'm of the stand where, Black lives do matter. Like, I'm not arguing that whatsoever. And not a single Black person should be killed by a police whatsoever. Like, and I'm not saying that at all. But I think there's something that the Black Lives Matter doing that's very, very dangerous, in a sense of what we've seen with, police backing out of Black communities, and we're seeing more homicides of Black people happening right now. And really trying to understand, like, does, Black Lives Matter as an organization, do they really do believe that Black lives do matter? Or is it just something to say when, like, does it only matter to them when a white policeman is committing this crime, right? I say that because we know that majority of the homicides that happen, like I said, happens on black crime. And they're not addressing that issue whatsoever. The only issue they say that matters and that is affecting Black people is the police brutality. And with police brutality, we can argue all day with people, but we're seeing more and more that people that are, the videos that are being released and such, they're finding out that they're half videos, they're not complete videos. And when the whole video is seen, these people are being let go, and they don't tell us why they're being let go, outside of the fact that it's just a racist society. So they take away that, like, mindset that, that for you to think, like, how could America be so racist? Someone gets shot by a police for no good reason, as they're making it seem to be, or for a very minor thing, as they're making it seem to me all the time, that is, and they're let go, right? And I'm not saying this doesn't happen once in a while, but the way it's presented, it feels like it's all the time. So what is, like, how have you seen that play out in the media, especially, and also how have we as people fully have downloaded this idea and become like this terrified of police, in that sense of, even when we drive, we look around, see if the police is around and such, and that mindset of like fear that we have kind of inherited from the media consistently telling us the police is after you.
Yeah. So I think it's really a very dangerous kind of narrative to be spinning, because when you're in high crime areas, the last thing you want is tension between the policing body and the community they're supposed to be serving. And what they're doing is just amping up tensions that exist for historical reasons, but removing the police is not going to fix the problem, because it's not the case that there's not dangerous people doing bad things in communities. I mean, there are. So you have to be able to say, okay, bad people can't do things. The police need to do their job. We care about the community we're serving, and we don't want them to be afraid of the people policing them. I think one of the best things that can be done is having community programs where the community interacts with the police, because the police aren't driving in from nowhere. They're people who live in that or similar areas, and the community should feel comfortable with them. So I think it was very irresponsible rhetoric to go around and spread that. And I do think it's so inaccurate, because it's not the case that police are going around hunting down Black people. I think if you get into an encounter with the police, a white person is more likely to be shot, I don't know if fatally or not, than if you're a Black person. But at the same time, we only ever see the Black people being shot. And the narrative is this person shot a Black person and they're going to get off free because of racism. But there is a justice system. It's not just a judge that decides they're free. There's a jury that decides that this person should go free. So I think...
Yeah, and I think to add to that, people would really, you all should go check. There tend to be a lot more Black jurors on these kind of issues, because there's that fear of, the rhetoric of racism when it comes to these white cops being released. So these jurors also happen to be majority Black folks.
Yeah, whenever they show news like that, like, you should take a moment and be like, that sounds so unreasonable. Like, I have not met enough racist people for me to believe that this is going to be a country that lets that happen. Yeah, I think you have to, you would have at least run into one, if it was that widespread. So, like, think about it and, go look at the actual case. Like, look at what the defense is saying. Like, is it reasonable? Is it about race? Like, most of the time it's not about race. It's just an accident. Like, these kinds of things happen to Black and white people. Like, the cops might have been negligent or irresponsible. It doesn't have to be a racially motivated cop. Like, it could just be a bad cop.
And I think in America, we know that, especially with the police departments, there's an issue of brutality. And that's not necessarily, at least anyone that has studied hasn't found that it was specifically targeted at Black folks. Right. It's widespread, and that needs to be addressed. And that's an issue that each city has to take responsibility for and give police better training, both socially and also, with their tools that they're using.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
I think we do need better training. I think we do need a lot of mental health support for police as well. And I also think that there's one video that I saw that just like, okay, this whole thing is made up. There's a video of a guy, and I think he had either some golf kind of, I don't know, guns that weren't actually guns. They were for some kind of sport. Or like they look like they were guns, but they were for golf or something like that. And so the cops were called on him, and he was at this hotel. So they came fully armed, many of them. And the one who was in charge and speaking to him told the guy, like, come out, put your hands on your head, and then, like, get on the floor. So he did, and lie on your chest. So he did that. And then he said, now come over here. How can you, like, he was giving him commands that he couldn't do. Like, physically, it's not possible. So we don't know what was going on with the cop for him to ask that. So the guy was like, okay, I'm going to, like, go. But then as he was going, he decided he's going to pull up his pants.
Mm-hmm.
When he did that, the cop yelled at him, but then he, like, kept moving, and they shot him. Like, there was nothing that happened apart from, like, they asked him to do something that wasn't a physically possible move to make. He was trying to make it work, and they shot him. Mm-hmm. And you see it happen in real time. And if you saw a video like that and the person was black, that would be, look at racism.
Yeah.
But this guy was white, so you didn't hear about it at all. That was just a miscarriage, of justice. Like, that was just a horrible accident that happened that we can fix probably with better training. Yeah. Who knows what was going on with that cop to make him do that?
Absolutely.
So,
I think there's a lot to be said in that sense of really, let's make sure that whatever stories that we've been told, we need to double check and super double check, because we know the media, I think 86% of it is liberal bias, has democratic bias. So really to really understand that and say, maybe what I'm being told doesn't add up. And I think also when a person, especially a black person in America, we have an experience of racism, which, we're bound to have at some point, because again, we're not saying that racism doesn't exist. It just feels like, aha, see, what I've been told is all, correct all the time. And I think when we're having that moment, let me just take a moment to say that, yes, absolutely, that should never happen. And that those are the things that we should fight, right? Like genuine racist encounters that we should be able to say, hey, let me correct you real quick. This is not how you should, this is not how I like to be talked about. But also try to understand that we can't hold a whole party or a whole system accountable to the reactions of the few, because the media chooses those few that they want to show us, the extremists that they want to show us. It kind of makes it that it's a norm, right? Like,
and you wonder, like, if it's so widespread and it happens all of the time, why is the coverage on a few cases that end up being disproven? Like, there needs to be more cases if this is really so widespread. And I'm sure, like, there are other cases, but, like, if you're trying to make a point and you have the option of giving something that cannot be disputed, why don't you do that?
Yeah.
Right. And I understand that my experiences are very different from a lot of people who are African American or Black in this country. Right. But statistically speaking, the police violence is not the biggest problem at all. Like, I mean, yeah. I think it was like 9 people were shot unarmed or something like that who were Black.
And even half of that they were released because there were some other issues that, anyway, this is a long conversation. I think we'll have to have you back, especially just specifically talk about racism in America. I think that's a conversation that is definitely needed to happen, especially for our community, because there's a lot of fear in, having to teach your kids how to navigate and how to talk to police and such.
Let me say one thing. It's like, I think that if you believe that there is racism, or like people are going to treat you differently, like I read this criticism of a book that was written, I thought the book was really good, but the criticism is centered around, like, they don't highlight the Black characters in this book enough. And so this was like a Marxist critique of the book. And the person was talking about when a Black person, like, this was adjunct to that analysis, but the point that he made is that Black people have like a certain consciousness, and I think they've done like a bunch of surveys that show that white people are less racially conscious than Black people are. So, and you hear people say, like, when I walk into a room, I'm aware that I'm Black, right? Like, no one's doing that to you. Like, that is, you know what I mean? Like,
you're told to recognize it.
Right, you're told to recognize that you're not. There's nothing external that can make you, when you walk into a room, realize that you're Black, So, and I think that we really should keep, our minds free of thinking like that. Like, people are going to think of me like this. You don't know. Honestly, let them think of you like that. Like, as far as you're concerned, you only know what you're thinking. And that person could be a bad person. That person could be a racist person. You're here to get about your day. And I think in order for any of this to be fixed, we need to take that approach. If you can't make everybody not racially biased.
Absolutely. And I think our one of our viewers is commenting that the pain is real. Yes, the pain is real. I think we're not arguing that the pain is not real. The pain is real. Like if we see those videos, the Black Lives Matter protests, people are feeling this deeply. And I feel it too. It's not like I don't feel it. I don't think you're saying that as well. When it's, especially watching some videos, I'm just like, why does this happen, right? Because it feels like the pain is real, and that's not negating that. And that's necessary for the political system as well, where the pain has to be real, right? You have to stay emotional to vote a certain way. And for me, there was something that someone challenged me a while ago that said, Black Lives Matter and the police brutality and all those things matter only until election time comes around. And right now there's no election. No one is talking about it. I think there was this one shooting that people are talking about a while ago. And then there is another one in my beloved city of Boulder, Colorado that happened. Unfortunate, very unfortunate. And people are just like really outraged and look at what white people are doing and such. But, one of the cases was absolutely some unhinged white man going around on a killing spree. The other one was not a white man going on a killing spree. And there's an issue of gun violence in the country. There's an issue of racism in the country, and the pain is real. But we can't consume this pain every single time because something is on a loop to terrify us into submission. And I think that's what's happening, especially how this is being used politically, especially within the Black community in America, because the Black community in America is the only community that votes 90% to one party, 92% to a party. That's ridiculous. To a point, even President Biden himself said, "Oh, I'm not worried about the Black community because they're not diverse." Like, I can't think of a more racist statement than like when someone comes and tells you, "Oh, Black people all think alike." There isn't, a thought diversity.
Yeah, no, I think like a really big thing is like, you can, if you want to see what the Republicans are saying, like watch what the Republicans are saying. There's Candace Owens, and her whole initiative is, I care about the Black community. I'm an African American. Here's what I think are the problems, and here's how we can fix them. I'm not an African American. I have not had, the specific experiences myself. From what I understand, and like logically thinking about it, say it was racially, like how are you gonna fix it by saying it's racism in writing or it's racism and expressing your pain? Like that doesn't fix the problem. And I think the only ways you can fix the problem are if you say, how do we make this not happen? Like how is it, how can we get to a place where they can't use the excuse of, there's a lot of violence here to put in more police. Like if it was a safe neighborhood, you don't have to worry about over policing because it's a safe neighborhood. Like there are fixes that would really fix the problems, but we want to focus on, it's a really painful and traumatic thing to be Black in America. I'm sure it is for some people. That hasn't been my experience. But even if it is, how do you propose to fix it? Like if you look at the Black Lives Matter website right now on their list of demands, I literally think hold on, let me just look at it right now. The first 4 of them are about Trump. The first 4 are about Trump and making sure he doesn't run again, investigating what happened on January 6th and the relationship between white supremacist terrorism and, what happened and police like coordinating to do things. So like, if you care about the Black community, like that's your biggest concern is Trump, really? Like, I don't believe that's true.
Yeah.
I think there's other things that you could be doing to fix it. School choice, they're not for school choice because they care about the minority people. Okay, I'm sorry. If you're living in the America that we're living in today, where schools are funded by property taxes, which I don't know that I've heard of. And then there's a voucher system that's being proposed by the Republicans, but that's horrible. That can't possibly ever work. Why would you let students choose where they want to go to school and have each student have the same amount of aid from the government to choose a school?
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff going on that it doesn't add up. And just because it's painful, you can't you can't
look away from
fix it.
Exactly. And I think for me also another thing that really drove this point home for me, especially when it comes to like diversity and representation and all that, is looking at a lot of especially, last year we've seen a lot of Black Lives Matter protests, and the majority of those cities were run by Black people. the representatives are Black people. And so as far as like a representation and political, who has political power in those cities are Black folks. So who are we really like campaigning against? That's why I was really confused as far as that goes, because if these cities are run by Black people, if the people that are running, writing the laws are Black folks, why can't they write the laws that they say is needed, as opposed to coming out and say, yes, I support Black Lives Matter, and put a little poster on your, social media or whatever that says Black Lives Matter, without really truly enforcing that idea of these are the solutions that we're going to propose to. Outside of, right, there's work that needs to be done, of course, when it comes to like racism in the bigger sense of it, but also like there are things that the Black communities we can fix within our own community we have completely disregarded, because it's not, it's not a pretty topic to talk about.
Yeah, I agree. I think that racism is probably a problem that people want to fix. I mean, it is a problem that people want to fix, and some people feel it more than others do. But I think that everybody should be able to agree that there's problems that are way more devastating and that need our attention, that are facing, African American communities that we can deal with on a bipartisan basis. No one would disagree with you if you said, okay, and this is an initiative Trump took where I think they're called investment zones, but going into communities that have been devastated by people moving out, and now they're economically, they don't really have stores there or anything like that. And so, investing in those communities so they can serve each other and so that it can be alive again and people can move in again. Like doing things like that, there's bipartisan support for. But we're going to sit here and instead have implicit teaching, implicit bias. We need to teach it out in schools and people and say it all the time, talk about it all the time. All you're doing is working against your case, because there's a lot of people who would help you that you're alienating by talking about an issue that most people cannot relate with. And you can't make them relate with it by saying it's painful.
All of you are
better relate. Yeah, and you are all racist. Like, no. If you want to fix the problem, let's fix the problem. We don't need to be, symbolically fixing the problem.
Yeah. And I think there's a sense of like needing, at least for me, right, when you have 20 issues within a community and the chunk of that has nothing to do with what's outside, I feel like the millions should be invested in making sure that those, the chunk of that problem is solved. And again, I'm not trying to belittle police brutality in the country.
No, but I refuse to accept that there needs to be a different standard that you hold Black people to when it comes to how they have to, how they interact with each other and act. Like if there's a kid who's born and they're Black and they're born in a bad neighborhood, there is no reason why that kid should have a lower life expectancy than kids born elsewhere. That's not acceptable. You're not going to tell me that's all because of the cops. Like it's not. And so we can't say, we just need to stop policing. Like what's going to happen to that kid? Like, does he not deserve the options?
Yeah. And I think that really is, again, taking away the responsibility from the individuals again, because I remember when Obama was running, talking about how, the biggest issue within the African-American community is fatherlessness. And no one is talking about that anymore as much, or if it's talked about, it's like, oh, it's just another issue that we could discuss, but not really like the biggest, as if that's like, we should discuss that. But even Black Lives Matter coming out, I think they probably removed it at this point, talking about how saying that a child needs to be raised by a mom and by a dad is Eurocentric, so it's racist. And it took me aback, because I'm like, what does that mean? Like, who's running this organization? Because for me to really understand, a lot of research that I've been done talking about how a child raised by a parent, by both parents, is going to be a lot more successful in life than otherwise, right? And why is that a controversial thing to say? Right. And to just really look at it and say, maybe we're going in the wrong direction as far as this goes. Not necessarily to say, like, let's discriminate against people that are single and having kids. That's one issue. And, that's a personal decision. But to say, even to say a child should have both parents, something that is backed by research should even not be.
Apart from the issue of, not having, I know a lot, Candace Owens talks about this, and a lot of Black economists talk about you need to have a father in the home. apart from like just the societal implications, of that, like the economics, most of children in living under the poverty line are with single mothers. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that if you, I just saw a comment, that's why I was trying to read it. But if you, like living under the poverty line, it has nothing to do with the fact that she's a mother or that she's having, but just economically speaking, if you have two people bringing in income versus one person, it's going to be different. Mm-hmm. And I think that, having strong social systems is very important. You have to have, just only the nuclear family is acceptable, but you can have grandparents and cousins and everything and everybody working together. You just need to have that infrastructure. And it just happens to be the easiest when you have, the parents who gave birth to the kid staying in the same house. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and the one thing I'm going to mention before we wrap up is also, I've only seen this in one place, so you guys might want to double check this, but just to throw that idea out as well, African Americans as a community used to be married and have a strong family background, even during the Jim Crow era, than they have right now. More African American kids are growing up without both parents in the household than they were during slavery, which the core background of slavery was to make sure that families don't stay together, right? People were being forced, African Americans were being forced out of their homes, right? That was forced onto them, but now they are choosing to leave it. It's gotten to that point where, that idea is very familiar now. And that's something that we could address, right? As a community, that's something that we should talk about, as opposed to only blaming all the issues of the African American community within the Republican Party, or within, onto only white people that don't agree with our ideas. But this conversation could go on for hours, Mahider, like I said, and we definitely need to have a conversation about race.
I had gotten a question. I don't remember what it is. Like,
it was about the IQ disparities.
Between?
I think there were, I'll have to find that. So I can't. I think there was an IQ disparities, like policy or belief that was, that used to be famous back in the days about.
And how it's understood and what it means. It's a taboo topic. But it's still, so I'm not exactly sure what they're referring to, but like a lot, I don't know, the only thing I've come across that talks about IQ and, the context of race is some white supremacists who are actual white supremacists and not like a misnomer, that is what they are, believe that there is an IQ disparity between the races. And that is not factually correct, because I think they've done a twin study where they took one twin to Germany and raised that kid there. And there is no disparity in IQs once you adjust for how kids are raised. And apparently you can also see that like within families. I don't put a lot of stock in social studies, like, experiments like that, but like still, depending on how a kid is raised and, what experiences they have, you will get different performances on the test. So the test isn't really testing your intelligence as much as the content that it's testing for and how much exposure you have to develop, problem solving skills like that.
Yeah, I think your comment about social studies kind of made me sound that's a typical science person to say. But someone in the in the sciences and technology, you tend to say, I don't know how much of this is and how it's done, and definitely an interesting point to bring up. But I've seen quite a lot of comments about like institutional racism and racism in America. And I think this is definitely a conversation that we can continue on. We've run out of time. So Mahider, one, I'm gonna need you to promise to come back and have this conversation with us. And another one would be, what message do you have to share with, the Ethiopian American community as far as, our political stance and what we believe in and what aligns, which policies align with, because we're part of that.
Okay, so I think that as Americans living in the US, we need, I feel a responsibility to preserve what about this country made it a place where my family could go when, we had no opportunities back in Ethiopia. Like, that's what happened, and that's why we're all here. So whatever, value systems that led to that, you should at least give it the benefit of the doubt and figure out, like, why is this system the way that it is? I mean, what and what are the changes being proposed, and how will that affect the nation that I came to and that has helped me? And I think that a lot of problems we're not paying attention to that will come and affect your kids, in terms of, like, I know politics mostly from when I came back from South Africa and I was in classes and we were learning about racism. There was not a single document that was saying, hey, like, these disparities that we're seeing, they don't necessarily have to be caused by, and there is a lot of research to back that up. I mean, look at Thomas Sowell, look up Thomas Sowell, look up Shelby Steele, Walter E. Williams, and look at their discussions of the issues. And so we didn't read any of that, but we read a lot about implicit bias and, like, white people should prepare to feel uncomfortable, and Band-Aids not being the same skin color, like you not being able to get Band-Aids that are your skin color is really an indication of how racist this country is. Like, I think
I haven't heard that one before.
we need to really take the time and understand that. And so basically, when I came to schools and I was saying what I thought about it, like, I didn't feel like I was a representative for Black people. I was speaking what I understood, and that's how everybody should live, I think. Like, I don't see a white person who's like, I'm going to reserve myself from what I think because other people who are white don't think the same as me. No, I think what I think, and I'm going to say what my experiences have been. And they couldn't do that in that class, because the teacher and everybody else would say, are you a racist? And, like, that is a problem just because it's not affecting you right now and you're essentially immune, at the moment, because you appear Black, like you are, you have dark skin. It doesn't make it right. Like, we believe that all people are equal and should be treated the same and fairly and as individuals, and not have associated guilt because they just are born a certain race. So I think that we know we value that because we came here and we're doing, what we're doing here by choice.
Yeah.
And I think we have a responsibility for the people who this is their only country. They don't have Ethiopia to think about and be like, well, this one can go do whatever. I always have a place to go to. We need to think about that. And, even the other people we care about who we think are being mistreated in this country, like, we need to be reasonable in our approaches and actually try and find solutions, not just things that sound nice that are going to have bad consequences or that won't fix the problem you're trying to address to begin with. So I think that's something I would say to the Ethiopian community is, like, make sure you know what the parties are saying. I'm convinced that most Abashas should be conservative, but, like, maybe not. I don't know, but look into it. And there's a lot of the stuff that you hear is really sort of, a narrative that's being spun and not the actual truth of the matter.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for being here, Mahider, and everyone else that joined us. We really appreciate you. Please go ahead and share and like this conversation. And we have our fundraising for our monastery that we're going to build in California after a few minutes, about 30 minutes or so. We'll see you then. And we'll come back with another program, the Digest program next week. And until we see you then, have a wonderful week.
The Golden Monastery in the Golden State. Gateway to Heaven, St. John the Baptist, and St. Arsema Monastery in the Northern California, Nevada, and Arizona Diocese will have its first informational conference take place soon. We kindly invite you to mark your calendars for April 10th and 11th of 2021. Special guests such as His Grace Abuna Ermias, His Grace Abuna Abraham, and Magabi Hati Sishatu from Ethiopia will be present. North American archbishops, priests, preachers, and gospel singers will be present as well. The conference will be hosted by Adebabay Media and will be streamed through YouTube and Facebook Live as well as Zoom starting at 4 p.m. Pacific Time or 7 p.m. in Eastern Time. Don't forget to share, like, comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow our Facebook page. We hope you attend and invite fellow Orthodox Christians to this conference, the Northern California, Nevada, and Arizona Diocese.